Welcome to Chapter 4. In this lesson we are going to cover Section 4.1 and the first part of that. So this will be Part 1 of Section 4.1. What shapes an ecosystem? So the last couple of chapters we've gone through these different levels of organization, and now we're moving on to this idea of the ecosystem, and we're also going to add even the biomes. So that was the new one we added in the last chapter, and we're going to continue to expand upon this idea. So things that are going to shape an ecosystem can be divided into two different factors, abiotic and biotic. So go back, if we look at the specific portion, bio, we said life, right? So these factors are going to be any living things that affect each other. Abiotic, this would be without life. So these factors focus on other things, non-living, that might affect different organisms. So examples of this might be climate, the wind, nutrient availability, soil type, sunlight, precipitation, etc. So these are all non-living things that are going to affect organisms. Biotic factors are going to be things like birds, trees, mushrooms, bacteria, anything that's living that's going to affect another organism. And these are the two types of things that are going to shape an ecosystem. So we're going to go into these factors in more detail. So abiotic. So you might want to put abiotic up here. So we're going to discuss in this abiotic factors. And one of that is climate and weather. So a little bit of distinction here. Weather is the day-to-day condition of the Earth's atmosphere at a particular place and a time, versus climate is the average year after year conditions of temperature, precipitation in a particular region. So day to day is really the weather, and the climate is year after this. So it isn't just that, oh, all of a sudden we're having a little, it's really hot today. Is that a year after year? You know, we know our seasons, we know if there's a hot spell, that type of thing. So making sure that distinction there. So how is climate kind of determined or decided? And it's really based on solar energy from the sun has a big effect on the temperature of the atmosphere, which is going to lead to all of these different changes. So a lot of the climate is based on the sun. All right, so what is this sun's role? Okay, so we have our nice little sun over here, a little happy guy. Sending out ultraviolet rays, hitting the earth. So the sun plays a major role in kind of the climate. We're going to go into more depth. All right. So one way, one of the roles of the sun involves this idea of this greenhouse effect. Now, if you've ever been in a greenhouse, often they're maybe warm, a little bit more humid, than kind of the outside environment type of thing. And it has to do with the ability for the sun to get in, and these ultraviolet rays and whatnot to get into the greenhouse, but their inability to get out as quickly. And that's kind of what the Earth does. So the greenhouse effect is the natural situation in which heat is retained by this layer of greenhouse gases. So these greenhouse gases make a layer around the Earth in the atmosphere that causes this heat to be retained and for it not to escape. Different greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, a few other atmospheric gases, and they trap the heat and maintain the Earth's temperature range. So that's a big part. So first thing in the sun, it provides these rays that come down, and we have this special kind of effect going on in our atmosphere that causes heat to be retained, which keeps us in more of a kind of constant temperature range. A little bit more on the greenhouse effect. Again, gases trap heat from the sun inside the ozone layer to keep the Earth's temperature relatively stable. Without gases, the Earth's surface would be 30 degrees centigrade cooler, so 86 degrees Fahrenheit. So if we look at this, kind of just gives us idea that we have the solar radiation coming in here. Again, it's coming, warms the surface of the Earth, and then some of it is able to escape, but a lot of it's not able to escape, so we kind of continue the cycle here. Okay, just a little bit more on the different types. So we have carbon dioxide, methane, CFCs, so chlorine, fluorine, and carbon, ozone, nitrous oxide. So these are kind of the gases that are in the atmosphere that are causing this greenhouse effect. And so when we talk about, the temperature warming up and possible effects of this, some greenhouse gas isn't necessarily bad. It helps us retain the heat. So we do need some of that, but we'll talk a little bit more about what happens when this kind of becomes too much. Okay, so we have one of the factors that kind of helps the Earth with its climate is these greenhouse gases and the sun. So the other thing that relates back to the sun is the latitude. So because of how sunlight hits the Earth, there are 3 climate zones: polar, temperate, and tropical. The polar zones are cold areas where the sun's rays strike the Earth at very low angles, between 66.5 degrees and 90 degrees north and south of the equator. Temperate zones are between the polar and tropical zone, and the temperatures range from hot to cold and depending on the season. So we have this season in here. Tropical zones near the equator receive direct or nearly direct sunlight. Nearly direct sunlight year-round. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll kind of see this. All right, so these are our climate zones. And remember, it has to do with the fact that the Earth is tilted on its axis. So this is its axis right here. And because of that, when we have our sun here, it kind of determines where the angles of sunlight are going to hit. This is the reason we have different seasons, and also the reason why we have a different climate in specific area. So if we look at the band that's maybe going to get the most amount of rays, is going to be this tropical zone. Okay, so they're going to get the most amount of sunlight, the most direct. Okay, and then you go into our temperate zones, which are going to get less direct amount of sunlight, and then our polar zones as well. So in today's lesson, we kind of talked about what can be factors influencing different ecosystems and therefore influencing biomes. So we have our abiotic factors and our biotic factors. So the first part of today really focused on that abiotic factors. So we're looking at the climate, and it really, how is that climate influenced? So when we look at the climate as being an abiotic factor, we know that the sun plays a role, and it has to do with some of the greenhouse gases that are trapped on the Earth that help retain some of the sun's rays and energy, and then also the tilt of the Earth, which is going to cause different change or varying amounts of direct versus indirect sunlight influencing the climate for that ecosystem.